anything you need. So I like to keep it between 5.5 and 6.0, just because pH will naturally rise. So if you're keeping it more towards the, depends on what tester you're using, but it'll usually be like a light orange or a light like gold color when you're doing the drops to test it. If you keep it more towards that, it will rise in that week period, but it won't jump out of that range, and therefore it'll make it a better overall growth. Because if you only lowered it to 6.0, if you don't touch it for a week, then it's going to be up to 6.5 or 7, and then it could potentially get out of that range, if that makes sense. And so if you can keep it in that optimal growing range as much as possible, it will benefit your plants.
I have another question, and I'm going to open it up to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because he's helped so many of my customers too, and other partners. But Karsten, can you speak to the importance of the water source, and if a person has soft water, what they should do?
To me, it's not the biggest deal. The only thing is if it, so I use just regular hose water. I know certain people put RO filters on the end of the hose, and then it filters the water a little bit. The only real thing that I think might get in the way is if you had any, like particularly hard water might build up more of the sediment that will kind of crust on the outside of the tower. And the best way to take care of that, and it's not hard at all, is to just take a cloth, just a damp cloth, and once a week go around and wipe it off, and that will keep it from hardening and really building up. And that's when you get the problems. If it's left for weeks or months at a time where it's not touched, that's when you get some of those crusting issues on your tower. But otherwise, just wiping them off is very simple. I would just throw that into your weekly maintenance of just take a cloth with you whenever you're testing pH and adding nutrients, and adding a minute to your time there saves you in the long run.
Okay. So what questions do you guys have? I mean, I always have stuff to ask, but are there specific questions from those of you that are, okay, go ahead, Valerie.
So I have a question. I have hard water coming out of the hose because the pH is like 7.0. So I'm always doing the reducer to minimize it. Each time I have to add in like every 2 weeks. What else kind of trick, or what else could I do besides adding the reducer in to kind of help it along? That way it's not too much of a shock to the plants.
I would just, if it's more shocking it, then I would just do it more often of the balancing, so it doesn't get too far out of the range. But 7.0 is just totally normal, because neutral water is 7.0. Okay. So coming out of your hose, it's typical to come out 7.0 to 7.2 in most places. It just depends on where you are. Some locations are a little bit different, but that's normal. So every time you add water, you're going to want to add nutrients. You can bump up nutrient usage a little bit this time of year because it's cooler. They're not getting as much sunlight, and so that can help the growth be a little bit better. But the nice thing is, say it's coming out 7.0 from your tower or from your hose, adding nutrients, especially the B nutrient, has acidity to it, so it will lower that 7.0 pH automatically by a slight bit. And then once that's mixed in, then you can test the pH again, and hopefully say that puts it around 6.5, then you only have to lower it a little bit. But just never overdo the pH, do it gradually rather than taking it too low and then playing like the raising and lowering game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you ever do take it too low, just because your water is coming out at 7.0, just rather than putting like up into it, just add water and it will come up automatically.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
So we have, oh, go ahead. We have Karsten for like 5 more minutes, and then once he
No, you
hops
got
off, we're
me.
gonna do some other
Copy
talking.
longer if you need it.
So,
Okay, I wanted to be super respectful. Go ahead, Valerie.
so Robin, Lydia's on and she purchased a tower about a month and 2 months ago. So she's
Okay.
regrowing. So she has a question for Karsten. She transplanted she called them her children into the ports, and 3 of them passed away. So she wants to
Okay.
know what was wrong on her part, because her pH was right on. In fact, she's actually got the perfect pH because she's in Pomona,
Okay.
the perfect pH that's coming out of her garden hose. So she wants to know what happened.
Where was she growing? Were they indoors that she started them, or was it outside?
Outdoors.
And when she was watering them, how big were they when she put them in?
But 2 inches.
Okay. And were they sitting in water all the time, or how was she watering them?
Before she put them into the ports,
Mhm.
Lydia, do you want to unmute yourself? And
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Yes, I had them in water all that time. The way,
So like they were sitting in water?
yes,
Okay. My guess would be almost over water. So did you start it in the black tray that they give you?
yes.
Okay. So that's a great way to start them. I would puncture holes in the bottom of that tray. So the only downside to it is that there's no place for the water to go. So they're staying soaked all the time, and it almost like overwaters your seeds. So when I water, gonna see if this will, so this is like cabbage growing. All of them, can you see the holes underneath? So water drains out of all of these trays because I don't want them sitting in stagnant water. It will, it can lead to rot in a sense, like their roots can rot because they're not drying out. And the reason that the tower works so well is because it's considered aeroponic. It's a version of hydroponics. So hydroponics is where the plants are sitting in water constantly. But if they are aeroponically grown, it's some water and some air. And that's why the growth is even better than hydroponics, because they're allowed to air out, and that aeration speeds their growth. If they're sitting in water the whole time, it can constrict them. They can grow to a certain point, but it might almost stop them. And then it either can lead to like a rot because they're just sitting in water, or it will potentially shock them too much to then switch over to a new system, if that makes sense. Because they're geared at that point to like being in water the whole time.
So my question is only why 3? From all of them, only 3, and there were different ones. They weren't even the same seed.
Mm-hmm. No, and that was just like my overall answer for what like the best way that I think to grow. But why 3? What varieties were they?
Can't remember. Do you remember, Valerie?
they were the bib lettuce and the kale.
Okay, and did they look weaker at all than others?
Yes, a little bit. They struggled initially. Yeah.
Yes.
And did they
Okay.
yeah, so you want to put in the strongest possible seedlings. So if possible, I would always grow some extras, because not everything germinates at 100%. So
So it's a fact that not all of them will make it.
yeah, like no, I don't get
Yeah.
100% growth. I don't get there's certain ones I try to pick seeds that are going to have high germination rates, but it's never 100%.
Okay, I just thought they were like not supposed to.
No. And
Oh.
so the other
Yeah.
way to make it a little bit better is also to use more seeds. I don't know how many seeds you put into the rockwool for each one, but kale I put up to about a dozen, just so it's a nice full bunch. And even if say, and kale
Oh.
usually sprouts at a really high rate, but say only half of them grow, you still will have 6 plants coming out of there. So you're not relying on like 1 or 2 seeds to pop up.
And I could do that with all of them or just kale?
I would do it for your leafy greens like that. If it's a lettuce, typically you can do 2 to 3, but you may want to, depending on how many of them sprout, you may want to thin it out later, because lettuce tends to do best with just 1 or 2 heads per cube. But if you're starting with 2 or 3, that should set you up for success.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great, great. Any other questions for Karsten while we have him here?
So I have another question.
Absolutely.
So if you want to enter, like, let's say for an example, I want to change it out like midway through, I can always take out, let's say the kale that I'm currently growing and replace it with red romaine. I can just take, I don't have to like leave it. It's not going to shock any of the system already, kind of like, because they already blended the pH together and they're intermixing, let's say the rainbow chard and like, that's fine.
Yeah, it shouldn't. The only time it may shock them is if they've gotten so overgrown that inside their roots kind of are growing together. And then if you're pulling out a plant and its roots have been kind of dislodged from where they were, that can kind of mess with it. But no, say like just your kale is ready to come out and you have another one ready to go in, just make sure when you pull it out that you get as much of the roots or all of them if possible from the old plant, and then you put in a fresh one and you should be good. The main thing is to make sure that if you're putting a new plant into an already grown tower, not to make sure that that new plant is going to get enough sunlight, that it's not going to be crowded out by some of the bigger ones. And if they block its light, then it may not do well. So you can rearrange stuff and open up a spot maybe near the top for your new plants so that they can get good sunlight, rather than if it was near the bottom or the middle, if they would be blocked, if that makes sense. So just make sure that it can get established. And then if you want to switch stuff up, the beauty of the tower is with the exception of like your large plants, which I would always keep towards the bottom, you can move stuff around if you need to rearrange it.
Awesome.
I gotta thank Karsten because he really freed me up. I'm sorry.
Yes. No worries. Sandra,
just
you had a
understanding everything's not going to thrive. Everything's not going to thrive, no matter how conscientious you are. And have fun. He encouraged me, move them around, move the plants around.
Yes.
Can you speak also to cutting roots? How often?
Wait. Yes.
Oh,
sure. So before
you
speak on cutting, yes, someone had a question. Sandra, you had a question before we talk about cutting roots. I want to make sure that Sandra gets her question. Where are you, Sandra?
I just had a question about I made a mistake and I put mint in the bottom.
Everybody laughs.
Yeah.
It's all over the place. So I would like to, what would you recommend as the best way to, I think I need to just put it in soil now because I don't have any other medium for it to grow in other than soil.
Yeah, and that's a great question because there's only a few in the tower that become almost invasive and can take over, but mint is definitely one of them. I don't know if you've gotten to the point where it's growing out of a different hole in your tower, but if you leave it alone long enough, it will get there. It spreads out roots like crazy. So the best thing would be to, since it's on the bottom, it's a little more difficult, but do your best to remove the plant. And so I would put it in soil. It will come back. The nice thing about mint is it's very hard to kill. So you could cut it back significantly and almost just leave it where it's doesn't have much greenery at all, like just leave a few inches, and then transplant it into a pot. Never put it into just the ground, because it will continue its spread, and so your ground will then be filled with mint and it will come up everywhere. So keep it isolated in a pot.
Okay, I know, because what it's doing right now is, I was telling Robin this, why is it shooting out water? It's not shooting out water, but every morning I go outside and there's a trail of water, and this, and she said the causing it to do that.
Yeah, so if you don't want to take it out of the tower,
I did want to take it out. I'm going to
okay.
take it out. I just couldn't get it out. I was trying to get it out and I was struggling and fighting with it. And I just was like, okay, it won. I give up.
Yeah. So what you might want to try is loosen the wing nuts on the top, and take those off so that you can just gently lift up the sections of the tower, and hopefully that opens it up enough that you can
Okay.
then pull out the mint if you
Okay.
can't pull it out. Otherwise, unfortunately, you might have to take it apart piece by piece, but that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, if you
Let
ever
me-
notice leaking on the tower, it's often because something has gotten too large for that particular port. So the roots will have expanded too much, and it's not allowing water to flow downward properly. It's falling out of the tower. So mint, chives, scallions, anything that kind of gets a wider and wider root as it grows will lead to that. So they're things that are good to then transplant into the dirt, which is a great way to grow in the tower if it still has life to it, but it can't, but it's getting too large for the tower. Pretty much anything can be transplanted as long as you put enough water, as long as you give it enough water to transplant.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I say Karsten's website correctly. I typed it in the chat. And
Mhm.
so it is S as in Sam, B as in boy, T as in Tom, G as in girl, seedlings with an S at the end.com.
Mhm.
SBTG seedlings.com. It's in the chat. And so because Karsten was so gracious to join us here today and answer our questions, you need seedlings. And I know that some of you are already getting your seedlings from him. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up. Any other last minute questions for Karsten? You have an expert in your midst. Go ahead, Karsten.
There was a question about roots.
Oh, yes. Elizabeth wanted you to, yes. Go for it,
So
Elizabeth.
if you, Elizabeth, are you wondering how often to trim roots?
Well, yeah, because I've fluctuated on it, and what you were speaking to previously, like even Swiss chard, those roots will get really, really big, and then you get leaking outside the tower. But tomatoes, particularly, I've gotten so that I can't even, and even celery, I've had to like cut it out of the port.
Yep.
So if you could help me help others not have the problems I've had.
Yeah. So that's kind of so you can kind of shave them down. So things that you know are going to get really large roots are a great way to use the clips. Are you all familiar with the clips instead of the baskets?
I'm not.
Let me go get one.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
Then you can see it.
Because a lot of you guys are using clips.
Right.
The clips are particularly good for those kind of, I mean, they work well for pretty much every plant, but so this is a clip. Let me switch the screen. So it sits, it's got a finger hold so that you can put it into the tower, and then the plant sits on this spike. And then if you need to move anything around, you can just lift up and it comes with it. So like here's a tower that was just planted, but here's, this is an iceberg. And so you can just pull the plant out. It sits on the clip And if you wanted to move it around to anything, you can just drop it right in. But what that allows for is the basket gets in the way. Whereas if you have a large plant like a celery or onions or chives, you can trim off the outside so that it fits back into the hole better. You can basically just shave down the outsides and it will fit again, and then hopefully won't lead to leaking, because the real reason that it's leaking is because it's expanded too far. So if you just trim the outside of the roots, not like all the stuff at the bottom, but just the width of like where the cube is, then that will allow it to fit and won't leak anymore.
I have one more question about, does everybody have their tower sitting on those rollers? Because I don't.
I don't.
Okay,
It's not necessary.
okay.
As far as roots like tomatoes, if they get too big, you want to be able to lift up. And if they're hanging down in this area, you want to just rip them off occasionally. So that if they're sitting in the water at any time, they're going to be drinking, which will cause you to fill up a lot more often and will cause you to go through more nutrients. You'll have to check the pH a lot more. So by just keeping them out of the water, particularly your large plants, tomatoes, cucumbers, cantaloupes, things like that, it will save you in the long run on how often you have to fill up.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, we're wrapping up and coming to a close for our monthly Tower Talks. Any one more question before we officially close it out?
Yeah. Do you have any questions
Okay.
on microgreens or anything?
Yeah. Oh, Valerie does. Go for it, Valerie.
So I have an extension kit on mine, and I know Elizabeth extensions on hers too. How far up or how many extensions can we possibly go before we're going to require another pump or a bigger pump, and kind of have to mix up the pH more, the chemicals, not the chemicals, the additives more to be more balanced?
So the current pump typically goes for one extension. If you want to go any taller, which you can, the commercial size is typically 11 pots high. So with one extension, it puts you at 7. If you go beyond 7, you need a stronger pump. But you can certainly go taller. I don't recommend going taller than 11, the commercial size, just because it's more susceptible to wind. It can blow it over very easily when it gets that tall. Like if you had a 13 high tower, the chances of it getting blown over in a windstorm are great. You can zip tie it to the basin, and that can be effective, but if it's really bad wind, it can still knock it over. So I wouldn't go beyond 11. And at the same time, the more plants that you have, the more that they're all taking up the nutrients. So the more they're going to be going through your water, your nutrients, and then you will have to balance the pH more often, just because there's more plants vying for the same nutrients that they'll be absorbing.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Carson. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and share with us. And just for the growers, we do this the second Saturday of every month. So if you're a partner, you have growers, you can feed them in here. And if you're a new grower, come back, next month, because every month there's something different in terms of what you're learning and what's even going on with your plants. So just know that this is a place for our grower community, and you all have a good day. Have a good day. And Elizabeth is my grower partner, grower hoster, and she's the one that connected us to Karsten. So Karsten, Elizabeth is like one of your biggest fans. So we just
well, thank you, Elizabeth.
Yes. And then one of our growers here, well, she's not here, but Cece, you help them tremendously. I know you get a lot of people, but you help them so much with just explaining everything. So we're really grateful for you for
Oh,
that.
well,
Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, you guys have a good afternoon, and we'll
you.
see you next
And
month.
Robin,
Yeah.
if you would like, you can share my
Yes.
number with anyone because people text me or call me all the time with questions if you need it. Anyone can reach out.
Okay. Awesome. We'll do that. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much.
Take
Have
care.
a
Have
good
a
day.
great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.